All right, guys and girls, today we are here with Mr. Joshua Walters. You prefer Joshua?
I go by both, so
By both? All
we'll
right.
just do Josh for this.
Josh sounds good. Real quick, for those that don't know, I know most of our athletes know about you and what you do and everything. You're around the gym regularly, but for those that don't, give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you're currently doing.
Yeah. So I am a doctorate of physical therapy. I did my undergrad at Abilene Christian. I graduated in 2014, then went to University of St. Augustine for health sciences in Austin and graduated in 2017. And since then, just been kind of practicing mostly in outpatient orthopedics and a little bit of some sports medicine as well. So I was in a hospital clinic up in Oregon for about 2.5 years before we decided that my wife and I missed Tex-Mex and brisket a little bit too much, so decided to come back. So I've been back in Fort Worth since the end of last year. So in another sports ortho practice out in Hazlet, and just trying to get people back to what they care about, and especially like enjoying my involvement with strength sports. So I've always had a passion for being around barbell stuff.
Nice. When did you get into weightlifting?
So my journey kind of to weightlifting was a bit of a roundabout one. I think as most people's are. It seems like a lot nowadays. So I was
there's very few that are like, I was born doing weightlifting, and
either they're not from the U.S. and they
exactly.
born weightlifting. So I played football in high school for 2 years, and I threw discus for 4 years. So I walked on to ACU, try and get a scholarship. About 2 weeks into off season and into the season, I realized that we have 4 really stud throwers that are 2 of them were going to be Olympic qualifiers, and 2 of them were seniors. I'm like, I'm probably not going to get the scholarship this year, so let me focus on school. So in that time, I'd been training powerlifting for a little bit. I've done some bodybuilding for a little while. So I've always been around kind of strength and conditioning to a certain degree. My junior year in college, I got introduced to CrossFit. There was a gym in Abilene, we're CrossFit Abilene, so Roy Gamboa was the big name. He was, I think this was the first.
Yeah, actually, no. Roy,
Roy's a good dude. So this was, I think, his first year going to the games. And so I went to his gym where he was training at, saw him throw around some crazy weight, and just a whole people just sweating, doing some fun stuff. So kind of got the bug there. Stayed in CrossFit, loosely, and then started coaching through about 2016, roughly.
Started coaching?
Started coaching as well.
Okay.
So I coached through my first year of PT school. Realized it was just a little bit too much on my plate, so I had to kind of scale back. But it taught me a lot about program design and coaching. I was blessed to have an awesome coach. Shout out to Rob and Bain down at the Combine down in Austin. Great dudes. And then in kind of my last little bit in the CrossFit world, I got introduced to the Olympic lifts, and like I knew that was kind of more my wheelhouse. I didn't need to be upside down. I was too big for handstand walks and handstand
getting
push-ups.
Up on the rings.
I loved ring muscle ups. After I got my first few, I was kind of proud of myself.
Nice.
Like I was at the CrossFit pinnacle. But then I was like, I'm too big for this nonsense. So I'd always kind of felt like at peace with the barbell. And then Rob was telling me one day that there was actually a weightlifting coach down about 35, 40 minutes south in Kyle. The lowers were still training out of their garage down there. Yeah. So they were my first weightlifting coaches.
Old teammates of mine.
Oh, I love those guys so much. So I miss them a lot. But they taught me a lot about the sport, and like at the time Tom was kind of really getting into like the history of weightlifting, so like I caught the bug and just ran with it. So
awesome. I
think my first meet was Chad Vaughn's meet, I think in 2015. Yeah. And I've been lifting and been around the sport ever since.
Sweet, dude. How'd you do at that meet?
I think it was a 6-for-6 day.
Oh, nice. That's exactly how you want that first meet to go.
Yeah, it was. I think that one went extremely well, and then I think I did the state meet next, and like I'm super excited. It was like a meet you kind of had to qualify for. Yeah. And my totals were crap. Like I didn't know anything about it. I just distinctly remember my first meet. I got to the venue super early because like I didn't really have like a true total for like a weight class.
Was that San Antonio?
That was San Antonio. Yeah. So we were at the hotel, and like weigh-ins were like at 6 a.m. I'm like, why are weigh-ins so early? And I looked at my start list and like, why am I with a bunch of little kids and like the masters? So I kind of got thrown into just kind of the middle of everything.
Yeah. We kind of based that state meet off of totals. So if you're coming in new,
I was super new, and I'm like, is this normal? So then the irony of it. So like I'm texting Tom the entire time, and I'm realizing that he's not awake yet. Like it's still 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And so he's like, yeah, we'll drive down, we'll get there in time. So like I've had every piece of caffeine and stimulant known to mankind, so I'm just buzzing. And I'm like, okay, it's it's like 10 minutes till, like where's he at, where's he coming, so he gets in like right in the nick of time. Like I had probably warmed up 2 or 3 times and kind of cooled down, but the meet went great. It was a lot of fun, and
nice.
It's that's my crazy first-ish like meet story.
Cool, man. So I just did like a quick talk last Thursday about kind of warming up and proper warm up and stuff like that. Me, all of mine is just coming from, experience as a coach and an athlete. I would like to get kind of your take on athletes. We'll stay specific to weightlifting right now. You might be talking about this is what all athletes need to do.
Sure.
We'll try to keep it a little bit specific to weightlifting. But my take was kind of like, it's important to primarily do a good dynamic warm up, and then, but a lot of your warm up is also going to be done on the barbell, kind of going through very specific things. And then if there's things specific to an athlete like prehab and rehab, then I was kind of saying you shouldn't even kind of look at that as your warm up. That should just be part of your program.
Yeah.
And that just needs to be something that you specifically do, and you need to allow your time for that. Let's start first, though, with like general warm-up. What's kind of your take there?
So warm-ups are essentially just for that, to get your body up to a temperature where your muscles feel like they have the blood flow to do the task, and should be specific enough to kind of prep you for whatever the task is. So that's for field sports, that's for strength sports, that's for just general activity. So that's just a good rule of thumb. So if you're noticing that you're spending more time kind of in the preparation, whether it's a warm-up, whether it's foam rolling, whether it's band work or whatever the case may be, then you are actually training, you probably need to shift some perspective a little bit and ask like, why am I having X amount of time dedicated to just getting ready to train? So the warm-up typically starts from general to specific. I just like getting the person warm, just kind of getting them moving. You've been an athlete for long enough. The first probably a few air squats suck no matter what you do. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that the rest of the day is going to be terrible, but you kind of move generally, and then like get to the barbell as best you can. Specific to Olympic weightlifting, what I've enjoyed kind of for people who do like to have a few kind of more specific warm-ups, whether it's like some banded mobilizations, or if it's like some more specific hip work or shoulder work, especially if like you have a heavier snatch day coming or a heavier squat day coming, you want to just feel a little bit more confident for the day. Like use that as like the in-between time from your barbell warm-up stuff. So say you go through use a few sets of like working through the bar. If it's a snatch day, you do your behind the neck work, kind of work on the overhead position, do a few muscle snatches, do a few hip snatches, like do your dynamic stuff. Like once you've done a round of whatever that looks like, you throw in some of your band work, you do your ER stuff, you do like your crossover symmetry, not enough to fatigue you, but enough to just kind of prime whatever's going on.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you go back to the barbell, and then you get ready for the next piece.
That's great, as opposed to the killing 15 minutes just going through one specific banded movement. But I like that, working it back and forth. And sometimes I find that with, like, I have Jacob who's in there right now, really tight, like thoracic. And so same thing, I'm like, dude, even between your sets, just go do some like banded stuff and keep it loose and keep it mobile.
Absolutely.
And so I like that approach of like, if you've got some of that stuff, you can be efficient with your time.
Absolutely.
And just kind of work it in during your warm-up.
I mean, we spend so much time just like training in the first place. Like most people are in the gym, 90 minutes to 2 hours at a time. Like you don't need to spend an extra 30 just kind of preparing for all that too, as best you can. Like
especially if you've got 1 or 2 minutes in between every single time you touch a barbell.
Exactly.
I mean, I've done it by default, and so I'm glad to hear from you that it's probably not a bad thing to do, because if I'm rushed to get a workout in, which usually me being at the gym, I'm almost always rushed to get a workout in, so I'll grab a bar right away and do some movements, and then get down on the ground, do some squats, do some dead bugs, pick the bar back up, do a few movements, and just kind of do that back and forth. And it's almost just because I'm like, I gotta try to get warmed up as quick as I can.
Sometimes, and as kind of learning as a clinician and also as an athlete, like less can sometimes be more. I was watching a conversation with one of my favorite people to kind of talk to, Quinn Hinnick over at Juggernaut, and Quinn put up on his Instagram story like what his warm up was for like a snatch day, and he did it in his IG story. story, and he went just drill by drill, but like there really wasn't a whole lot of specific like joint related stuff. And he put as a joke, like caveat, was like his first thing that he did when he got to the gym was like put shoes on, first squat sucked, and then this happened.
Yeah,
and he just walked all the way
exactly.
through it, and it's just that reminder that training doesn't have to be super sexy. It doesn't need to be something that's Instagram worthy all the time. But if it gets you prepared to do the task that you're practicing for, that's what we're there for. Like we're there to do the sport better.
Yeah. So
sometimes that reminder, like if I'm spending too much time kind of worrying about like a nagging thing or things like that, like let's make sure the priorities are in place.
Well, and that's good. Also, like what you were just saying about like because. And if as you're warming up, you feel like you need to do some more stuff, just kind of work them in. Mm-hmm. Like there's nothing wrong with if you're at 50% on your snatches and you're like, I still need to loosen the shoulder up. Mm-hmm. Just go do it in between your sets.
Do a couple extra warm-up sets.
Yeah. Once you've got the barbell, that doesn't mean you have to be done with everything else.
Right. You can take your time going through it. And I recently met a few more athletes that'll warm up and then I kind of come back down. It's like, no, something didn't feel right. I want to go back through it again. And it may mean a couple extra repetitions through there, but I think talking with the coach and making sure it still fits the framework of the plan. Mm-hmm. I mean, most of the time, if you just want to feel at your best to kind of get going, like there are a lot of ways to go about it.
Yeah, and then a lot of times our athletes are also competing. Mm-hmm. And then when you get to a competition and you don't have a pull-up rig to attach your bands to and all this kind of stuff, and you've never been able to like mobilize or get yourself ready in just with your body and the barbell, then that can also sometimes be a hit when somebody's like, I don't have my PVC, what do I do?
What do I do?
Yeah.
I think there's some validity to kind of structuring a few training sessions that are like super minimalist, like no music, just the barbell and the platform, like kind of simulating competition space. Because not only gets your body kind of used to like what that space feels like, but mentally kind of prepares you for like, all right, you're in a crowded back room. It's just you and your coach, kind of like in creating your own kind of space where you feel comfortable in. Like, how do you make the most of that, and how do you still accomplish the task?
Absolutely.
So I've been kind of toying with that with my own training recently, kind of before joining with the team, that like try and strip away a few things and get back to like what's the essential right now, like what's the task for this training time or this training cycle, like what are we really looking to prepare for?
Yeah, especially when you're getting into like those peak phases of your training. If you can't lose the headphones and still hit 90%, then there's something wrong there. Yeah, because you're gonna have to.
There's a couple coaches I used to talk to, and I can't remember specifically who they did, but like usually 1 or 2 heavy like max out days in their peak cycle, there's no music in the gym whatsoever, and it's just like this is where you're at for the day, and just go for it, just get after it, enjoy the energy from the team.
I love it. And what I notice about that too is you end up drawing more energy from the team.
Absolutely.
Because now there's not all this noise and all this kind of stuff. So now it's this person stepping up and everybody's let's go. They grind through the squat. They're yelling. Like I like it too because it does mimic that now you have some eyes on. The energy is high. And you're not having to just bring it yourself.
I mean, isn't that some of the best parts of like, especially as these meets have gotten bigger? I was listening to the episode with you and Stan, kind of telling stories about how AO series and AO finals have kind of grown, and like nationals, and just like the scale of the sport. It's awesome to see it grow, but sometimes like having that energy or that extra buzz from the crowd,
for sure, having
the lights on and like the photography kind of going, like it's a good thing to kind of feed that positive energy, and it's also something you got to manage too. Like that can be anxiety inducing for some people as well to kind of perform too. So having that happy balance and kind of practicing that balance of how do you harness that on the day, I think it's a fine line.
For sure, and it's totally trainable, like you said. You can mimic those scenarios pretty well, especially in the gym. Let's shift a little bit. Let's talk about some of the common injuries that we see, or at least like common pains and some pains that we see, because it is pretty different for a lot of people, but there are some that I would say are pretty reoccurring for people across the board. For the ones that I notice the most of is usually going to be like the wrists, the elbows. I actually see less in the shoulders.
I'm seeing less in the shoulders too.
But it does happen. But I'm seeing less in the shoulders, and then always the knees. The knees. There's just the wear and tear on the knees.
The other one I see pretty commonly is low backs too. I think we talked to last week a little bit. So one of the things that makes our sport so unique is the speed and the dynamic aspect of the sport. And so going from like a static pulling position to a turnover, so you go from pulling, like hip flexion, lumbar flex to a certain degree, to full extension, triple extension, and then right back into a hip flex position. Like you're taking a lot of those deep hip flexors into like a lot of very fast change of position. So is that trainable? And I've seen like a lot of eccentric hip flexor work that's been really, really nice to have as either like some accessory work towards the end, or as part of like that warm up, especially like for heavy cleans or heavy snatch days.
Explain exactly what you mean by eccentric hip flexion.
So let's say we had an athlete kind of laying flat on the ground, and so either in a laying flat with a band around both feet, or they can have the feet elevated onto a bench, and then keeping as much of a lumbar neutral, or like a little bit of lumbar flexion, kind of tilting the pelvis down.
More like a posterior pelvic tilt.
A little bit of posterior pelvic tilt, kind of bringing the feet up towards you against some resistance, or pushing down away in some resistance, and kind of alternating back and forth while keeping that nice neutral spine. So it almost simulates, it kind of simulates the idea of having like a neutral trunk position in that pull, but at the same time like that change of hip position as you're into the catch, or you're transitioning into it. And so I've been experimenting with it a little bit with a few of my my patients in the clinic, as well as a few other athletes that like I consult with. And so far it's been really good. We've been having a few less, kind of back injuries. The other things like getting to like the wrist.
Well, that's still on that low back though. Would you find that a lot of weightlifters are stuck in extension?
I think we accentuate extension a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a bad thing per se.
Yeah.
I think sometimes just the nature of our training in the sport, like you squat, you pull, you snatch, clean and jerk. That's kind of, there's not a ton of variability outside of that. So taking the advantage of like the fact that we train in cycles, like you have like a prep phase or hypertrophy phase, kind of work into a strength phase and work towards peaking, like using those earlier phases to kind of work in different planes of movement goes a long way. Just having like that variability and just movement qualities, and just training other stuff that's not specific to the snatch and clean and jerk.
Yeah,
I think has some validity.
Get your legs in a little different positions, some split squat type stuff, and
lateral plane stuff. Using the transverse plane stuff as well too. Doing some ab work that kind of challenges you to kind of work for rotational stability, things like that.
I think that's great. I love hearing you say that, because that's something that I catch shit for, is doing weird movements sometimes in our cycles. And I'm like, but you're the further out we are from a meet, the more variety we're going to implement.
Oh yeah.
We're going to train a lot other areas, and then as we get closer, we're going to get very specific.
Absolutely.
And so, it's a great way to kind of mitigate some of that, just being stuck in the same position all the time.
And sometimes even just for rehab's sake, that's kind of how I approach, like when I have an athlete come to me, let's say that they're coming from the CrossFit or Olympic weightlifting world, and like I'm having issues like with my back and like the pull. It's like I can get all the way past the knee, no issues, but as soon as I cross the knee, like my back just flares up, and like I'm having some issues getting there. We may take away, certain movements that are specific to the sport per se, and look kind of more general first, just see what kind of patterns and things pop up. He's like, oh, we're kind of doing this whenever you side bend, we're doing this, whenever you're standing on one leg, let's kind of play with this. Let's get some really good basics and some foundations kind of reestablished, and then let's put it back into context for the big thing. Like, let's make sure that pull position looks good. Let's see how that translates to your lifts, and make sure that we're not having the same symptoms pop up, and we're managing that well.
Do you have some like go-to movements that you're like, this is going to kind of be my assessment?
I do. I like a goblet squat. It's super easy to assess.
Yeah.
We'll do an air squat before, just kind of see what their overall flexibility, especially lower extremity and a little bit in lumbar, and then I'll put it under load, just something light enough to where they can still feel like they're in control.
Yeah, because definitely people don't air squat the same way that they loaded squat.
And I think there needs to be a difference there.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that there's a difference.
Yeah.
But it also kind of assesses some confidence. And then as far as overhead, I like a behind the neck press, just to kind of start and just see if, one, how comfortable do they feel like putting their arms and elbows that far into full abduction, full external rotation, and just kind of see where they are comfort wise. If they can't do that, then we'll do like I like to do more stuff in the front rack position, and it kind of gives me a general picture first, and then kind of go more specific from there.
Yeah. So I do if I get somebody brand new in, kind of my like really quick screening is the goblet squat, the behind the neck press, the front rack position.
Yep.
So and then if they can do that, front squat, and then usually like an RDL movement, and kind of see when their back starts to flex, how they hinge, and all that kind of stuff. And then usually like an ankle assessment. I do kind of like the 4-inch rule from the wall.
I like it. It has some context to it, and I'm sure you've seen it. It's just how a person's kind of put together too. You may have somebody who has some super long shins that are going to knock out 4 inches, no problem.
Yeah.
But they still squat like they're Bambi, kind of getting lost in the forest. So there's usually some context that can kind of go with that. So I like the ankle screening to a certain degree, but sometimes it can get, for me, I've seen it can be a little bit of a rabbit trail just to ankle. Sometimes it also can pop up for something at the hip. So hip and ankle go hand in hand.
And and I've used the ankle screening due to somebody else, another person kind of telling me about it. But then all it ends up doing is me being like, well, you just need to get some weightlifting shoes. Yeah. And then their ankles move fine.
And then they're in the spot they need to be in.
And then they're in the position they need to be in. So I'm like, okay, well, that's fixed.
Yeah.
And, so unless I guess it's really, really bad.
Yeah.
But you're right. We also see some people when they catch a clean, their shins are actually pretty perpendicular. And then we see others where their knees are 10 inches in front of their feet. So also depends on the build for sure.
Definitely. And their training age and so many other factors. So sometimes it just helps to kind of see some stuff in context and kind of letting people fumble through it. I take the learn by trial and failure and trying an success type model, to where like I want the person to kind of feel through what they're going through first and have some context with it, and then be able to kind of self-correct as well as they're kind of learning about it.
That's so huge. It's almost a pet peeve of mine when a coach or a trainer is like on top of them for every single rep. I'm like, they need to go through a learning curve. You just told them about this movement.
Right.
They're not gonna perform it right. Yeah. It's gonna take a little while. Let them practice. Practice about 10 reps of that. Here's something else. Practice for a little bit. You're right. There has to be like that curve.
Oh yeah.
That happens, and then you got to let them you got to back off a little bit too. Let them move around. Let them get comfortable with it. Then start discussion.
Absolutely. And then there's like that moment of realization. Like everybody has that light bulb moment where like there's a lift where it all comes together. You have no idea how you ended up underneath the bar. You have no idea how it got there. But like you're just hyped that it happened, and you hope that you got it on camera so you can kind of figure it out later.
Yeah, sure.
And I think it gives the people the chance to feel that and enjoy that, and kind of know that like this is something that can be repeatable. And like now they can kind of put together like, how did this happen?
So what's your take on something like so I'm still stuck on the low back.
Sure.
What's your take on something like the reverse hyper, where you do see like this flexion to extension type movement?
I like it. And again, you dose it, appropriately. So if like a younger person who maybe doesn't have like quite the same training age as maybe like an experienced lifter, I may use it more for like some body awareness stuff. So we'll do it unweighted to kind of have them feel their extremes of full trunk flexion, full lumbar extension, just kind of know what the difference is, and kind of train it just with some tempo. I like using tempo work and more kind of controlling a few constraints, just gonna create some awareness first and make sure that it's a task that we're trying to see in context somewhere else. So, and then as like there's some comfort with it, as we kind of also take away the narrative that your spine is kind of like a piece of Play-Doh, that we have to be super delicate with it. I think once we kind of build some resiliency that way, and there's some robustness there, then we can start loading it up with some other activities. So I use the Jefferson curl a lot for my back rehab patients, for like general population and my athletes.
That's the one I've caught the most shit for, is letting people do Jefferson curls.
I do too. And like I typically, in discussions with other colleagues and other clinicians too, my first question is like, so what's the rub? Why are we bristling about it? And then like if they ask a question or like they have more generalities about it, and like, well, my task is this, so I usually have a specific purpose for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, the research and the literature kind of supports that the spine is super resilient, and it can take compression, and it can resist a bit of some shear to a certain degree, in very trainable and dosable amounts. So you don't obviously take 185, give it to a person, let them drop off on it. You take it in small doses, and however you want to train that, and like what is the purpose of it.
When I've caught the most shit for it is when they'll see, I might have an athlete that's got a 24 kilo kettlebell, and they're doing a Jefferson curl where their face is touching their knees, and but what they don't see is it took them 3 years to get to the point where they're doing that weight. And so my approach has always been we stick with a weight for a good 12 weeks
At least.
And we make sure that it's comfortable, range of motion is there, and then when we increase, we're only increasing by maybe a couple pounds.
Yeah.
A kilo here and there. And so it was like a 3-year process to get them to that point where they can safely do and comfortably do Jefferson. So when they look at loaded flexion, we're looking at really, really light relative to that person.
Sure.
That person could probably grab 200 pounds and Jefferson curl it up.
Yeah.
They don't need to, though.
Yeah.
But the dosage of 55 pounds, people lose their shit over it.
I think we also lose the context too. Like for most of the people that, especially that you're working with, like they're back squatting under loads that are, if we're looking at disc compressive forces, that 4, 5, 6 times, the load that's on their back anyways. So if we're really, really worried about, certain types of forces and the physics of it too, like let's take the context and look at it from a bigger picture. Like the sport that they're requiring and the things that we're asking people to do are far more challenging than like maybe a very sub-maximal load on the spine into flexion.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we hammered the low back, and we've decided that it's okay to move your spine around a little bit.
Yeah. I think my favorite video recently that I found again, there was a hook grip video. There's I think a youth lifter from Chinese Taipei. She caught a snatch and like her butt is so rounded and like in between her feet and like in a snatch she doesn't lose the weight.
Yeah.
She still somehow stands up, but she sits in the bottom for like a solid 8 seconds and stands up with it. It was one of the scariest things I've seen, but also one of the most impressive things I've seen.
And my guess though is that's sometimes my other argument is if there's like a complete lack of exposure,
sure,
then your body's going to freak out and tense up.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of times why a muscle will lock up on you. It's because if your back has never been in flexion and then you have a bad catch,
yes,
then you're more likely to kind of lock up that back at that point. But if in between your training, you're doing some spine mobility, spine movement, it's not going to have that rigidness all the time. So when it's exposed, it's not going to freak out. Yeah. It's going to have kind of an idea of what to do.
Because your brain's got to process all this.
Yeah.
Like your brain is a supercomputer that is taking in all this information, like your day-to-day stuff, your training, your sleep, your recovery, all that's got to be synthesized by the brain, and it's taking in these inputs from so many different stimuli. So when it comes to training, like the more variability you can have in just like different movement patterns or just like exposure to a bunch of different ways that things can happen, I think it allows for your body to be like, oh, we've done this before. Like this isn't anything new. Like it may have been a long time ago that we've done it, so like it's a little uncomfortable, but that protective mechanism has context.
Yeah.
It's not just like freak out, nope, we're locking everything up, nothing's happening.
For sure.
And that I think sometimes can be a predisposing factor to recurring injuries. Like there's a very big spike in activity, or there's a large stimulus and exposure to something that hasn't been done before, and it's not dosed well or not taught very well.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that a lot of people, especially in the U.S., because we're not quite as specific to like weightlifting as far as like kids growing up and all that, but I think it also shows that people who have done other sports do really well in weightlifting, and because there's still that whole athletic component of it, and that if you've trained and done a lot of other types of movements, you just have that better body control, that awareness, that ability to like, if you have to save a lift, you kind of like, you're not processing how to save a lift. It's your body has to just respond and do it. And if the less athletic, usually the more of a challenge we see there. And so I think it would make sense in my mind that you would also want your athletes specific to weightlifting to be doing other athletic type movements.
Yeah, there's definitely some value to that. We say that with our other, professional sports. Like more successful professional athletes, especially as we've seen over the last few decades, have had a background of various sports. They didn't specify into one sport probably until way later, until late high school at the earliest, college, and moving forward. And those are typically the athletes that have the most success, and typically you don't hear as much an injury risk, as anecdotally we can see.
Yeah, sport's a sport, there's going to be injuries, but yeah.
Exactly. But usually you don't hear the same pattern of overuse injuries from athletes who have had like a wide array of sports that they played. They were multi-sport athletes growing up than the ones who kind of specified very young. Like the incidence of, young Tommy John surgeries in like sub 15-year-old kids is ridiculous now.
Yeah.
That shouldn't even be a consideration. And I understand that, like there's the argument that like there's the social pressures from like scholarships and different opportunities, but more than likely that extra AAU tournament that you think is going to be positive for little Johnny at 8 years old, that there might be a scout there, is probably not going to be all that detrimental or all that essential to that person's development as an athlete than maybe like that same AAU tournament when little Johnny's 18 and he's looking at a scholarship. That's when it matters a little bit more. But when he's 8, like Johnny needs to care about being a kid, being 8, and having fun, and like learning how to move like an 8-year-old.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move in. So you were about to kind of talk about the wrist. My take on the wrist is usually people have shitty shoulders, so the wrists kind of so you compensate with the wrist, and it takes on more of the load that the shoulders and the rest of the body should. What do you typically kind of see as far as wrist issues?
Fortunately, most of my patients, I haven't had a ton of wrist issues. Most of the stupid stuff I've seen with wrists is from my own fault, from just doing dumb things, and just dropping a barbell here, missing a clean there, and just catching the odd stuff. And it's kind of funny. Form typically follows function. So the wrist and the ankle are your like most distal hinge joints, and then you have a very proximal like ball and socket joint. So your hips and shoulders have a little bit more degrees of freedom, a little bit more demand on certain movements. So especially for like squatting, hinging, and overhead movements. So typically, what is lacking in some joints, in some cases, tends to kind of show up further downstream, or can be exposed to that. And the front rack position is just kind of awkward. Sure. And there's several components, whether it's shoulder external rotation, is it thoracic extension, is it a bit is it elbow flexion with rotation, like with supination. Like there's so many other components that go into it. I think having a little bit of time spent in each and being comfortable in that position definitely has some value. But for myself, I have a hard time saying that it's always just the shoulder or it's always just the T-spine.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You got to kind of look at it at all. Because if the person has the ability to kind of touch, thumb to shoulder, there's plenty of shoulder, flexion and probably some rotation there that's available. And if we notice some changes as like the bar goes overhead, or we see some other kind of odd, movement pattern somewhere else, then we kind of might be able to poke around and see like what's legitimately kind of showing up.
And plus the wrist is a pretty small area, and it ends up holding all of the weight. So it makes sense that, and like you said, there's not a whole lot of movement going on there. So with that amount of weight, a little excess movement here and there is probably pretty easy to flare the wrist up. Do you have any recommendations of like things that people can do for their wrist, especially with weightlifters, because they're constantly gripping? So, forearms are always blown up, and then constantly in kind of holding this weight with kind of the wrist bent back, a lot of times they're getting that pinching or that pain kind of in that position as well.
I like doing a little bit of wrist work. I like the wrist flow that you have for some of your athletes. I think there's some utility in using that, and especially earlier parts of like the training cycle, and just doing as many full grip things as they can, I think has some use too. Or at least doing your warm-ups with as full a grip as you can until like we kind of get to that point where like the bar is still off your shoulders and you kind of need to be in the position. And just spending a little extra time in some reps, just like intentionally working on keeping a very disciplined front rack position. I say that as I don't practice it myself all the time, so I have to remind myself, like,
you've been doing good.
Do your warm-ups, like take the time, like the extra 3 seconds, sit at the bottom, make sure that the position is where it needs to be. And I think having those accumulated reps of doing it so many times, like the position will improve. Time under tension, time under load.
Make sure you dial in the technique, the form prior to starting to really increase that load.
So it may be that's part of your warm up is that you do all pause front squats full grip for your first few front squats for setting up for a clean, and that's that's your everyday kind of warm up progression. So
let's get past wrist.
Okay.
Here's the one that I run into all the time with it's certain athletes they never have any issues. Certain athletes they always have issues. And it's the knees. and it's the tendonitis in the knees.
Yeah.
And so I spent a good amount of time trying to design a tendonitis program, and then I found out that some things work for people and some things don't work for people.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, this is a whole waste of time, because this thing that I designed based off of this person going through tendonitis didn't work at all for this other person.
You just described like the last 15 years of tendinopathy research.
Yeah.
And like that's where my head has been like for the last 4 or 5 years. I'm like, oh my God, like we still bicker about all the stuff. So, which I think can also be flipped to be a little bit positive too. Like there are many different approaches to taking care of patellar tendinopathy. So low-hanging fruit on the tree, you see a lot of people doing a lot of hip work. Hip specific training is fine. The hip is a large joint. It can affect and does have a lot of effect on like your squat mechanics and things like that. You know, having some relative internal rotation at the hip at the bottom position of a squat typically allows for a little bit more forgiveness between the knee, because the knee is more of the byproduct between the ankle and the hip. Yeah. In many situations.
Yeah.
So that's one approach. You can look at some ankle stuff. You can look at the hip, make sure that those are in the position to set you up for the most success. Load management is the big one. If you're taking a long time off of the sport and you ramp right back into it, like big spikes in activity, tendons don't like that. That's just, you have what we see in the research literature as stress-shielded tendinitis or stress-shielded tendons, where like, you know, training is a stressor, a good stressor that helps, you know, promote bone growth, promote, you know, ligament and tendon thickness, you know, good stiffness, all the positive things we want to see. But at the same time, like as trainable qualities, like it has to be progressed in a certain manner. And so big spikes in activity typically flare up tendons. It's usually they're overused, so we have to kind of scale back some of the loading and then gradually kind of work back into it. And so altering loading patterns can look as something as simple as doing isometric work, whether it's your wall sits, whether it's pause squats, box squats, you know, more controlled constraints to movement. Eccentric work has its place too. Doing some reverse Nordic curls or like true knee, I think it's like true knee extension.
True knee the natural knee extension that I do, which like is actually flexion, but
right. I looked at it the first time I saw that. I'm like, I think I know what he means. But I love that drill and just being able to use that too as like an accessory tool as well. And then just repeating the movement, but also with like the context of, if you know that in a volume phase that like if you do 8s, like by the time you get through like 3 weeks of doing 8s, that your knees are just shot, you may only need to do 6s for a little while. And that's an adaptable quality. The other piece too, as I'm kind of learning myself, is like the nutrition side of it too. Like there is validity to like inflammatory markers in our foods. So like, are you really eating like a super high protein diet? Like are there proteins coming from good like leaner sources, or is it a little bit more red and processed things? Like how's your balance there? Are we just way too calorie dense in the first place? Like
have you looked into collagen?
Not as much. So like that's kind of the next piece to what I'm learning, and this is typically where I defer to like, you know, Renaissance periodization or precision nutrition or Institute of Nutrition, IN3. So like a lot of times I'll kind of send them to those coaches first to kind of dial that stuff in. But I tell the basics of like, make sure that you're at least getting your macros, you know, as correct as we can from what we know, before you start diving into supplements and stuff like that. And make sure that you're at least addressing some of the easier things like adequate hydration. You know, make sure your macros make sense for your body type. And then you can start kind of playing with some of the details.
I think you hit on a good point, because, you know, I'll sometimes be banging my head trying to figure out, you know, movement patterns, drills, and exercises, and prehab, rehab. You know, I'll talk to a bunch of different, you know, doctors and ask them what their recommendation is. And sometimes it's probably that, you know, and I've seen it actually happen, where somebody's having this pain that we cannot fix. And then, you know, they get through finals and their pain starts going away. And we're like, this is probably more stress-induced than
literally
anything.
Stressed. You were just stressed the hell out.
And so I think kind of remembering that there's a bunch of outside factors that you need to also make sure that you're doing. So if you're always feeling beat up and we can't figure it out inside the gym, like there's this whole other side of outside the gym stuff that we can be working on.
Absolutely. I think in the social media age, as beautiful as it is, you know, for processing so much information and getting access to so many different people, I think we forget that sometimes these are humans, and these are highlight reels. They're not just robots that go into the gym and just bang out every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a long bit of context that whether it's their training history, whether it's their whatever their exercise program was, that kind of led up to this moment that you see in this like 15-second video.
Yeah.
But also that they're human as well too. You have no idea what their outside their video stuff life is. Like they could be managing death of a family member, or changing job, or like a baby was just born, or a whole bunch of myriad of other things that have good stress and not like distress on the system, and having adaptive coping strategies for that. Knowing kind of what your recovery and your sleep looks like 8 to 9 hours a day of sleep. It's kind of what everybody says. It's the way it works.
Yeah. As
soon as you get into that sub optimal like sleep deprivation, you're going to notice not only your strength and like your performance change, you're going to notice your mood and affect change. You're going to notice your calories and how your body processes things. It changes everything.
It literally changes everything. And I've said this way too many times on this podcast, but Dr. Matthew Walker.
Yeah.
Why We Sleep.
Great book.
It's actually entertaining. It's not as boring of a read as it sounds.
I would say, though, don't get the audiobook. So it's this British guy that's reading it.
Really?
I've been going through it, and I listened to it on a plane, and I passed out so quick. He's so soothing. He's so soothing.
It's funny because I think the very first chapter, or the very first page of that book says, if you happen to be reading this and you fall asleep, it's okay.
Like I appreciate
yeah. He was like, that's good. You'll actually remember more of this information.
Yeah.
But after reading that book, I always knew that sleep was important. Like, it was always something that was talked about in sports. But after reading that book, it turned it from being like it's important to it's a priority. Mm-hmm. And I actually have a probably somewhat unhealthy fear now of not getting enough sleep.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably had like those trips where you've got the team, getting ready for a competition, and like coaches are stressed the hell out like the entire time, like through like a competition day. So when you don't have your sleep and you're stressed out and the other things that are going on for a competition, it just all adds up.
It's so hard to manage anything at that point. And but I like kind of giving that reminder that sometimes and a lot of times it's not what's going on in the gym. Mm-hmm. And I talked about this on another one of those Thursday Q&As, was kind of like the 3 pillars of like staying healthy. And one is your regular exercise, 2 is your food, what you're putting in your body, and then 3 is like your stress management, which would include sleeping. Sleeping is part of your stress management. And then I describe it as like a tripod. Mm-hmm. If one of those things are being completely neglected, you're not going to hold up. You're going to crumble.
Oh yeah. Yeah, in Stoic philosophy, I think they talk about the virtues of like what makes the whole human. Mm-hmm. And so like it's like you said, it's regular exercise, adequate sleep, adequate nutrition, adequate hydration, healthy relationships.
Yeah.
And they all have to be in tandem with each other. So sometimes, at least the clinical side of things, if I've got a patient, it's like flared up back pains, been going on and off for years, have tried all these different therapies and kind of a lot of different approaches. But then I kind of, take the step back. Let's look at it from 30,000 feet. It's like, what's your sleep been like? Like, what have you gone through in the last 6 months? Like, are you going through some stuff right now? And sometimes it may be like, it's like, oh, sleep's just off. Like, I only get 4 to 5 hours of sleep. It's like, go to bed 30 minutes earlier. Like, that is your PT homework.
That's
like,
what you're going to do.
That is your homework. You go to bed 30 minutes earlier. It's like, like my kids are stressing me out. It's like, have a you day. Like, create a little space of your own type of joy and resilience, like that is intentional and structured in a manner to where like you can turn down like your stress levels some.
For sure.
And just being able to have an off switch. Like I don't think we as Americans kind of in society do everything like at red line as much as we can, because we love this hustle. We love this like full tilt boogie at all times. I think we sometimes lose value in having times of wonder and times of joy, like in just structured times of play. Like we lose those things.
Yeah. Play is one that I can talk about for a while.
Yeah.
You kind of hit on some keys of Stoicism. Have you studied that much?
I'm reading into it more. So
I'm a big fan of Ryan Holiday.
Ryan Holiday's the dude.
But that his most recent one, Stillness is Key, kind of talks about that, like just having those times where there isn't anything going on.
Yeah.
And how important that is for us, and how much we actually thrive on that. Like, if you think back like evolutionary, like we weren't always going. Actually, most of the time we probably weren't.
We're hanging out.
yeah. Most of the time you were probably hanging out, and that's still something like in our body that's important. And so to have these moments of just like, all right, I'm gonna focus on, which is why I'm also still a big meditation fan. Just to take moments where I'm not everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm not great at it. I am only good enough to probably knock out about 10 minutes a day.
Still more than most.
But but I think that's also like a big lure to like weightlifting and sports too, is there's only so many things that you can do where you can only focus on that.
Yeah.
And I think part of what's fun about meditation is it's like mindful, or it's not meditation, sorry, about weightlifting, is it's also meditative and it's like a mindful practice.
Absolutely.
Like you're not thinking about the bill you have to pay when you're doing a snatch. So I think that's part of what's like so rewarding about it.
Absolutely.
Is there's like that whole part of it that's like you're giving your brain a break from all the other stressors. But then you have to factor in that you're now doing physical stress.
Yep.
And sometimes weightlifting in general can also be stress.
Oh, yeah.
So you still need some other things that are going to kind of help you stress manage.
I think one of the best things that I've kind of put into practice recently is like having structured just structured no time. So whether it's no phone or while we're on vacation, like we have nothing planned for the day, and it's just a day just to be.
Nice.
And just let it happen for whatever's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, the last trip that Sarah and I took out to Hawaii, like it was for our honeymoon, we had like, so many different things and the touristy stuff planned.
Yeah.
But we had like 2 days where like there was nothing on the agenda. So
Nice.
like, what are we going to do today? It's like, I don't know. We may be total beach bums today. We may be just total couch potatoes, but like it always feels like it's exactly what your body and your brain needs.
Yeah, that's really good. I need to be better about, I'll sometimes take it as it comes, but to like actually make that conscious effort to like schedule it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's great. I think it would probably cause my wife more stress if I said we got nothing on the agenda
There's
today.
nothing going on today at all. Like,
yeah, she's like, well, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
But like you said, but even if it was like, we're just going to chill out for an hour, and that's what was on the agenda, she could probably wrap her head around that.
Sure.
As opposed to me just saying, whatever.
Yeah, it's a kind of just go with it. I think having the awareness, and like so much of the sport is about like awareness of body, like body and position, awareness of like your strength and your program and like the context of it, but also just like as a human having an awareness of self. Like if you know that you have like these triggers that make you more anxious or make you more prepared to kind of do other stuff that like is not really you, like be aware of your triggers. If like your phone is a big distraction, take a social media break for a while. I'm a huge fan of like getting off social media for a couple weeks. I took 2 weeks. I wasn't on anything.
Impressive, man.
It drove me nuts at first, but I also realized like I have so much extra time.
Yeah.
What have I been doing?
Yeah.
But sometimes just having just like those little resets can kind of yield a lot of long-term change. It's just like some kind of novelty that your brain and your body typically need.
Yeah. And that's probably such a good practice to learn too, because I see this all the time. Bringing it back into weightlifting is one of the big problems I see, especially if it's a bigger meet. If I take an athlete to a bigger meet, they weigh in, and then that 2-hour break between weigh-in and when they start touching a barbell, if they're like, amped and they're like going, by the time we get through snatches, we're heading into clean and jerks, they're wiped out.
They're tanked. Yeah.
They're done. And it's because they couldn't take like time to like let their nerves calm down, let their anxiety calm down. They're focused, they're all over the place. Like they haven't had any good practice of being able to just like chill out when knowing that this somewhat stressful situation is coming up.
Oh yeah. For me, for myself as an athlete, I've been fortunate that a bunch of my coaches kind of have learned my personality pretty quickly. So weigh-in happens, and if it's like, an AO series meet or something like that, I know that for myself, go lay somewhere and just like take a quick nap. Even if it's 15 minutes or I'm just like on the ground, not doing anything.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like my nice little reset. If I can't sleep, I'm usually listening to some kind of funny podcast or like some stand-up comedy.
Well, something distracting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to be really in tune with, but yeah, you're not, again, you're thinking about something else. Yeah.
I don't need to be absolutely present in that moment. I just need to be kind of away. And then when the time is right, somebody will grab me and, we'll get to the platform and off we go. But I think just having that little mental just kind of maneuver away or just like that pivot has a lot of value.
Oh, yeah. I've had to say, no, go to your room.
Yeah.
Go
lay
chill
down.
out in the hotel room. It's like you cannot sit in the warm-up area for the next 2 hours.
Don't watch any weightlifting.
Don't be around weightlifting. Yeah, to kind of just take a break. I even find myself, if I go to a weightlifting meet now, like the last thing I do is like stick around. I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna coach. We're gonna do what we need to. But then I'm like, all right, I need a break from all this chaoticness. I don't know how you're doing on time. Are you good?
On time.
You good? Okay.
Yeah.
Because this brings me into like something else that I want to discuss. Now we're just talking weightlifting. I'm just kind of like totally sidetracking.
That's okay.
Is when you're sitting in the crowd watching weightlifting.
Yeah.
To me, unless we're at like the last few lifters and they're going head to head, it's very boring.
Yeah.
You go into the back room and it is chaotic.
Oh yeah.
And the energy is high. The coaches are all over the place. How do we get people to see weightlifting from the backroom perspective?
Without giving me an aneurysm, I'm not sure. So, in working medical for USA Weightlifting, like I'm usually in the back, and so I'm kind of watching the cast, and it's kind of a cool like social experiment. So you can definitely tell the coaches who have been there.
Yeah.
You can definitely tell the coaches and athletes who haven't. And you just by watching for 5 minutes.
Oh, for sure.
You can definitely tell who's like they've been their first meet, they've warmed up a lot, they're just amped and ready to go, they just can't sit still. You have your coach that's kind of nervous, just kind of pacing back and forth and stuff. But then there's a different type of like pacing and focus for like the coaches that know that like there's a game plan that needs to be executed. I need to be aware of my variables. I need to know what's going on. And I think just having people kind of do stuff like this where they get to talk about like the experience of competition day, of what goes into kind of coaching and planning, like that awareness will also help like the spectators see more of the sport. I think also having better commentators at times, whenever
oh man, there's so many times watching a live feed that they're taking their 10-minute break between snatch and clean and jerk, and you hear them like start eating and talking about something else,
something random
on the side. Like, come on, at least turn your mics off.
I've given a couple people a hard time about some of their like between.
So the commentating is
stuff.
Rough, and I think part of the issue though is that the announcer is also the commentator sometimes.
Yes.
And they need to have a separate commentator, and they've done that for bigger events like Worlds and Olympics and stuff like that. But to just mic up the announcer,
it's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like having commentary in there, and especially when it's done well. Like I think this last Worlds where we had JP.
I thought that was one of the best.
It's one of the best teams
for sure.
They've had in a while.
They did some homework on the athletes and talked about some of their some of their background and stuff like that. It's way better.
Oh yeah, because then you kind of get a little context, like, oh, I want to root for this person.
Yeah,
it's their first Worlds. Like, I want them to get a shot.
Yeah,
at this.
yeah. This person bombed out last time, and things like that. Like
those all help.
Yeah, for sure. But I agree, it was way better that the last Worlds than it has been. And I like to see more of that, but I think like visually, like there's got to be a better way.
Maybe like sneak a camera kind of back, a little pan shot to see what's going on in the back room, and or similar to like Worlds and the Olympics, where like they have the camera kind of go through during introductions to kind of see the athletes as they're going through their warm ups, like what their team kind of looks like. I liked the shots of like the marshals table, where you see like all the coaches on the screen.
Agree. Yeah, you see the changes happening.
See the changes going on. Like as soon as one change happens, 3 other coaches go over and change their attempts. And,
and watching that back and forth, that's so much fun.
Oh yeah, especially you know what's on the line too.
You know what's going on.
And you're like, okay, the reason why they went up is to see like, well, this person kind of matched that, and like you get into like the gamesmanship of like what makes a competition.
And if you have a good commentator that can be like, all right, he just used his last change, and so's going to bump up, and like if you can kind of like have that play-by-play thing going, because the sport could, if the sport was right now, the sport's only making money off of athletes.
Correct.
In memberships. Mm-hmm. We're really not making any money off of like spectators showing up or anything like that. And that's like one of the biggest differences between like football and soccer and baseball and all that. Like those athletes are being paid because people are showing up to watch that.
Oh yeah, and you see that with
really
CrossFit
not seeing
too.
that. Yeah,
like CrossFit, the games were such a hit and like became marketable is because like it became a spectator sport.
Yeah.
And like they structured the games for it to be spectator friendly. Like it would be kind of fun if you almost did like home run derby style, where like one person faces off against another person, like, lift for lift, like, who's going next till they miss, like, kind of home run derby style would be something fun like that. It would drive people nuts.
Throw in like some exhibit kind of like random part of it,
especially to kind of just get the casual person to at least see like the impressiveness of the lift, or like or what the sport really kind of demonstrates.
Get a better context of what is actually going on in the sport, how it's played. But that information is like just not really out there, and like there's no reason why nationals people shouldn't be showing up to watch nationals.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if like, especially for A sessions at nationals, they should have it set up to like to Europeans, to worlds, where like there's a little camera that kind of pans to the marshals table, kind of shows the jumping around, all of that all that helter-skelter, and then kind of go back to the platform with the announcing and kind of explaining all that too.
For sure.
We definitely see, people come up and see that more often. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you can show up at nationals and there are international athletes and Olympians all lifting at nationals, and nobody's really there to see it, but then you take them to the Olympics and everybody shows up.
Absolutely.
Because the Olympics has been marketed better.
Yeah.
And I would really like to see that some money starts coming in, and if there was some way of like I agree, showing the marshals table and then having commentary of saying like, this is kind of the back and forth, this is the battle that's going on. I mean, that stuff draws you in. Absolutely. Because as a coach, it's so much fun to be in the back. Because you're playing the game and you are going back and forth, but even when you're done, I'll sit there and watch to see how that session finishes out from the back.
Oh, yeah.
Because I want to see, and I'll watch. I'll be like, oh, that coach just made a mistake. He just used his last change, and he needed, he should have bumped up. Or,
could have played their cards a little bit different.
And so you can see all that happening, but from outside, you don't see any of that going on.
It's hard to catch that. And maybe, for Olympic weightlifting to kind of grow, it may need to take some different forms. I like that we've had like some of these online qualifiers or these liftoffs or these more like unofficial type meets where like people can kind of jump in and make it into more of like a community spectacle. We almost did like a clean and jerk home run derby at a gym I used to work at, and to where like people could sign up, they paid the registration, but like it's just an ascending ladder, so they get to lift on some really nice stuff, but like they take one attempt at a time until they missed, and like that's their strikeout. Their strikes, they're done.
Yeah, it's fun.
But it kind of gets the crowd into it. It's like, oh, they took this twice, this is for a big PR, like having some energy kind of pumped into it would be a lot.
Well, and that's the reason why the CrossFit Games, I think I might be making this up just because somebody said it to me, so I don't actually know the numbers. But they always said that some of the biggest turnout for spectators events were the lifting portions of it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's usually because it's set up on a timer or with a ladder or something like that. And so you can see, or they have 12 athletes out there lifting at the same time.
Yeah.
And so you can see, and then they've got the numbers posted. This person is now snatching, they're usually like in pounds, but they'll be like, this person's now snatching 265, and then you see somebody over here who has 270 on it, and they just missed it. And so you can you can actually see the battle going on kind of as it's happening.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like, obviously the way the sport's played, because it's an Olympic sport, I don't think the game should change at all.
No.
But maybe we should have other events that are catered to pulling people into the sport.
Just teach them.
Like, there's no reason why we couldn't do like a snatch ladder. That'd be so fun to watch.
A lot of fun.
And if they filmed it and they marketed it and just like put it out there, people would watch. People would be like, oh, this is very entertaining. And then maybe we start drawing people in. Maybe they all of a sudden they're a fan of watching, Maddie Rogers show up at this event and do the snatch lift off, and they're like, oh, she's going to be in town competing at nationals. I'm going to go over there and watch her. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It might be the route.
It might be.
I think we just figured it out.
I think we might have saved a little bit of the exposure of the sport.
All right.
Okay. Feeling good about that.
Yeah.
Accomplished a lot today. I've accomplished a lot before training today.
So We're probably coming up on our hour mark.
Yeah.
And so we can probably sit here and talk for another hour. But what we'll do is we'll get you back out here and we'll chat again.
Love to.
I mean, we barely touched on things. Where can people find you?
So for rehab-based stuff and content, it's shifting more towards education. I like to do a lot of stuff with like new grads and students and connecting them to other clinicians and assessing research and stuff like that. So on Instagram, I'm at the Human Movement Rehab, And then for like more dog pictures and the occasional lifting stuff, I'm DJ House Brother on Instagram. So lots of stuff kind of in the works for over the next couple months. So I'm excited to kind of get going.
Cool, man. Looking forward to it. Now to training, right?
Time to train. Let's go do some stuff.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Bye, man.